Hello, and welcome back to Media Monday. Before I explain this week's concept, I just want to talk about a couple of things really quickly. First of all, you can see I have a new background. I came inside today. I'm not out in the cold, which is nice. My family's away for the day. Also, I was told that my hood up was not a good look, so I have decided to keep my hood down this week. I also want to thank you for your comments and questions. I really do appreciate it for a number of reasons. They help me develop my understanding of things, being challenged on some of the things I say. And they also help me see where my explanations can be confusing. So please continue. If you have questions, if you have comments, write them below, please. Also, there were a couple of articles shared with me this week. I'll try to remember to put the links below. The first one was an interesting one. I talked about the idea of real, nothing being real in the media. And my brother sent me an article about the Samsung CEO. If you're not aware of it, the new cameras, of course, that are in their phones are coming out. And these cameras, you can remove people or objects quite easily. And people, of course, are saying that, oh, this isn't real photography. And his response was that he said there's no such thing as a real picture. And again, I think he's right. If you think about it, photos, as we know them, are digital representations. They are ones and zeros. They are two-dimensional for the most part compared to the three dimensions that we see. There are lots of things that prove that they are not real. And the other one is an interesting article about a renewed push for media literacy in the States. A couple of things that stood out to me. I just put these quotations down, so I'll read them for you. It says, but some Republican lawmakers and conservative thinkers say the media literacy skills coming out of state legislature are vague and promote woke ideologies, pointing to some suggested curriculums that advocate for a more equitable and inclusive society. They worry that some of the measures will undermine parents' ability to instill their values in their children. Well, the way I see media literacy, as I've explained it many times, is it's basically critical thinking, being able to understand how messages are made and how they affect us. So if your values can't stand up to then I guess my argument would be you need to think about your values, right? How have those values been shaped? And perhaps they are, that's the problem. The second one that I found kind of laughable was that they said most people learn media literacy in their life. Again, not my experience. Having taught this many times and talked to people about it, there are lots of people who think that they are media literate because they watch a lot of TV or because they're on social media a lot, but that does not make someone media literate. You really have to understand how things are put together in order to do that. Which brings us back to our concepts. So, concept number 3 this week. As a reminder, we've now talked about how all media are constructions. We've talked about how these constructions have attitudes, interpretations, and conclusions built in. And, of course, how the media, constructing those things, builds our picture of reality. So this week's concept says that audiences negotiate meaning in media messages. And basically what it says is that if the media provides us with much of the material upon which we build our picture of reality, each of us finds or negotiates meaning according to individual factors. And then it goes into some of those factors. And I'll just try to explain them very quickly. I used to do this in much more detail in my class, but we don't really have time for that. So the first one is personal needs and anxieties, right? If you are deathly afraid of something, then you're probably going to have a different reaction to a film about it compared to somebody who doesn't. So I used to use the example of arachnophobia, right? Which, if you don't know, is about all these giant spiders that attack. And if you are afraid of spiders, it makes sense that you're going to have a much stronger reaction to that film than someone who doesn't. Right? Same is true with needs. If we're looking for something in our life, if we believe something is really important, if money, we want all the money in the world because we want to live this, lifestyle that we'll get into later on in the course, then those types of stories are going to appeal to us, right? The get rich quick stories. That's the type of stuff that's going to appeal to us. It can be simpler than that, though. It can simply be the pleasures or troubles of the day that have an impact on how we negotiate meaning. Our mood, right? I know in my case, we have a tendency to turn on shows that we've watched before in our household, things like The Office. I've seen some episodes a few times, but I also know that I've had different reactions to them, right? On a day where I'm feeling really good, I'm quite happy, maybe I laugh a lot at the episode, whereas a day that it hasn't been quite so good, the exact same episode might be on, but because of my mood, I may not find it as funny. So we need to be aware of that as well. Certainly, racial and sexual attitudes can affect our interpretation of things. I'm not going to go too far into this one right now because I think anybody who has been on social media has probably witnessed this themselves. Depending on our attitudes to both race and sex, we can negotiate very different meanings in media messages. Family and cultural background can also have an impact, right? How we were raised. I was raised in a fairly Christian household, and I still have a memory of my parents coming home one day and I was watching Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing. And they joined in, and I think they were pretty shocked because of the language that is throughout that film. Now, to their credit, my mom did come back and say to me the next day that she thinks she understood why he did that, why he chose to include all that. But at the same time, it was quite clear that, because of our age difference, there was a difference in the way that we interpreted the meaning there. Same is true with culture. I had a very interesting experience where I was showing a film called Crazy, which I think is one of the best Canadian films ever made, to my class. And it's a little questionable, right? There's, again, teacher-student relationship comes into it maybe. There's some sexual stuff in it that I'm always, do I show this? And I would usually explain that to the class beforehand and, tell them that if there's something that you think you shouldn't be watching, you are welcome to leave. And so one time, it rarely happened, by the way, because usually after we watched the things, they would tell me that, it's nothing compared to the stuff they watch in their own homes. So, but once late in my teaching career, I had a Muslim student in my class, and I was a little more sensitive because I understood that he had made it clear to all of us that he was a fairly strict Muslim. So I was worried about this, and I made it clear to him that, if you want to try it, that's fine. Just feel free to leave if you have to. So as we were watching it, I knew the scenes were coming. I've seen it many times, and through both of these sex scenes, there was no real reaction. He was there, and then suddenly later on in the viewing, he got up and left, and I was very confused by it. And so afterwards, I went and asked him why. What was it about that moment? And he explained to me that it was because they were drinking beer. And that was the thing that was actually more offensive to him and his culture was, seeing people portray drinking beer in the media. I had no idea at that point. I learned quite a bit that day myself. So all of these things have an impact on the way I always describe them as like filters, right? So as we watch something, as we read something, we're kind of putting it through all these filters, and we're getting different meaning because of it, right? So it says, because each of us brings with us different experiences, we have to be open to the fact that different people will experience the same television show or movie or any piece of media in different ways. And I think this is important for two reasons, right? It certainly helped me understand how others interpret things differently than I do. So as a teacher, this was super important, right? Again, the age difference was the biggest thing. And I had to understand that they didn't see the media the same way I did, perhaps, or they didn't interpret things the same way. And I'll get to some examples of that in a minute. I think I talked last week about this idea of jolts per minute. And certainly, if you pay attention to the media, you'll have to have noticed that things are much faster paced today, right? Movies have to start with something big. All the Marvel movies start with a big incident, and then we kind of backtrack. Whereas in the old days, 70s and 80s, things started very slowly. Just saw another interview with a guy. I think he was some big tech guy. And he said he doesn't enjoy any movies made before 1998. And when they challenged him on that, he just said they're too slow. I don't have the patience for them. So again, that's a negotiated meaning. The other thing it does is it helps me examine my own understanding and my own misunderstanding of things, right? If I realize that maybe my filter is a little bit off, or I'm being impacted in a way that I shouldn't be because of my mood, then I can go back and rewatch something. And I've had that experience where I've watched films, expectations play a big role in it. I remember years ago, my wife taking me to Dances with Wolves, and I've come around to Kevin Costner, but at the time I really disliked him, and I was getting a lot of press, and I often, have a negative reaction to that. So I really wanted to dislike it, and I went in, planning on disliking it, and I came out really enjoying it. And I think part of the reason is because my expectations were so low. And I've had the opposite experience. I mean, today it's every film that's coming out is the best film ever. And of course, you go in hoping that that's the case, but rarely does it live up to that. So here are a couple other ways that I tried to explain it in my class, and I hope you find them funny. I don't think they're offensive, but again, you're interpreting this, so maybe you will. I would often talk about the idea of parody or irony even, right, in our media, and how, some people don't understand it. And if you don't understand that someone's being ironic, right, and if you've forgotten that term, it simply means that they mean the opposite to what they're saying, right? And if they don't understand that someone's being ironic, then they take it as the truth. So the same is true with parody, right? And often these things, we develop these skills as we age and mature. And I used to tell this story about The Simpsons. So when my first daughter Taya was, I think, 2 years old, it was before Tegan was born. I was home with her, and I had learned early on that I could, if we were watching TV, I could get away with watching anything that was animated, right? She wouldn't, ask me to turn it or complain too much. So my solution was, well, let's watch The Simpsons. It's animated. She'll let me keep it on, and I can find it funny. And I remember watching an episode. I don't remember the whole story, but I remember they were in Moe's Bar, and the whole storyline at that point was about how they were playing tricks on each other. And of course, they escalated. So they started pretty innocently. Somebody got squirted in the face with water and whatever else. But eventually, it got to the point where Moe gets Homer to lean forward, and he lights his tie on fire. Tie burns, comes up, burns his face. Ha ha ha! That's funny. And then I hear my daughter laughing, and I think, oh my God, I just taught my daughter that it's funny to burn somebody, right? Like, she doesn't have the skills at that age to comprehend that this is meant to be ironic. That this isn't really, we're not supposed to act like The Simpsons. The Simpsons are kind of making fun of all of these things that we do. And so that was the last time that I think I probably watched The Simpsons with her, at that age at least. But that was a good lesson for me and a good reminder. And even with my students, I had to be reminded of that. For them, I would use other examples. I thought Austin Powers was a good example. I was always surprised at the number of them who had seen the films but didn't realize that it was a parody of James Bond. A lot of the elements are, taken right from James Bond. So I would share this one with them, which usually got a reaction to. I would tell them, there's a scene where Austin Powers comes into a casino, just like maybe Casino Royale. I'm not an expert on James Bond, but it's the famous scene where he introduces himself, Bond, James Bond. And then he asks this woman who he's met what her name is. And in the Austin Powers film, she says, Alata Vagina, right? Ha ha, clever, rude, whatever, kind of name. It's funny on its own. But then I would say to them, okay, how many of you know the thing that's being parodied, the name that's being parodied? And barely any of them knew. So I would explain to them that in the original James Bond films, that character was known as Pussy Galore. Get it? Pussy Galore, Alata Vagina, right? So suddenly that meaning changes. Doesn't make it any less funny. Might make it funnier if you find parody funny. But it kind of works on levels, right? So you can find something like that just funny on the base level. But as soon as you understand that it's a parody, it has a new meaning, right? So we negotiate that meaning. And if you don't know the James Bond films, then you don't get the parody, right? My daughters used to like watching The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody. And of course, I had to explain to them, well, do you understand why the rich girl's name is London Tipton? And they were like, no. And I'd say, well, you know who Paris Hilton is. At the time, she was quite popular. And, oh, yeah, well, think about those names, right? And if you think about it, you can realize that, okay, Paris, London, two kind of major world cities, Hilton, hotel chain, Tipton in the show is a hotel chain. So Paris Hilton becomes London Tipton, right? So there's parody again, and how understanding that changes the meaning. Finally, I would often end with Apocalypse Now, one of my favorite war, or I guess anti-war films, and the famous ride of the Valkyrie. I just looked up how to pronounce that just to make sure, and I might have it wrong. It might be Valkyrie, but whatever. I'm going to go with Ride of the Valkyries. And if you don't know it, it's a famous scene. Again, I'll see if I can find a link just to that scene in particular, where there's a helicopter attack on a Vietnamese village. And so I would show it to them first without the music, okay? And just let it play through. And we talk about it, and we talk about how it was a pretty typical firefight in if you've ever seen a war film. It doesn't seem that, that different. Then I turn the music up. And if you don't know, what happens is in the film, the colonel likes to have music playing when he attacks. So he puts on Wagner, his piece of music called Ride of the Valkyries. And it's a very heroic sounding piece of music. And so, again, we'd watch it, stop, talk about it. Kids would often say, oh, well, now, it's a much more heroic thing. They are going and doing something heroic. It really added kind of a level of seriousness and beauty to the scene. And I'm like, okay. So then I explained the rest of the film, the context. And the context is, if you don't know it, that they are attacking this village because the colonel is big into surfing. And one of the guys who they are taking somewhere, he's a world-class surfer. So basically, the colonel wants to take over the beach so he can see this guy surf. And of course, that has a level of absurdity to it, right? All of a sudden, you're like, oh, okay. Combine that with the music, the heroic music, more meaning is created, right? A different level of meaning. And then, this only came later to me, both of these, but then if you know the film Jarhead, the Jake Gyllenhaal film, which I think is about the first Desert Storm War, that scene appears in the movie as the soldiers are waiting to be called to duty. They're, spending their time doing whatever. And one of the things is watching this film. And as they're watching that scene in Jarhead, they're getting all pumped up, right? They're using it. So they're really, the irony is they're using this anti-war scene to get pumped up to go to war. And then it gets interrupted. They get called and they're going and they're all ready to fight. So again, it adds another level of absurdity. And then finally, I learned that the original use, or one of the original uses of that song, was in Birth of a Nation, right? And Birth of a Nation, again, if you don't know, is basically, it's considered a pretty racist, early American film that's quite racist. In fact, it was a silent film, but the card that went along with it said, "The former enemies of North and South are united again in common defense of their Aryan birthright." So then, suddenly again, there's more meaning at it, right? We're interpreting a different, by understanding that and knowing where that came from, we are interpreting another meaning. So that's the concept. That brings us back to where we started, right? Each time we add a layer of understanding to something or interpretation, that we are negotiating a different meaning. And that explains why we can watch movies and have different reactions to them, why we can, some people love Apocalypse Now like I do, other people do not like it. And it's simply because we are negotiating a different meaning. All right, as always, thank you for listening. I am going to try to upload this as a podcast at some point, because I know there's no real point to you actually seeing me other than my nice shirt today, Plato's Cave. Right, this goes back to the allegory of the cave. But yeah, I understand that probably a podcast form would work best, just listening to me, for those of you who want to hear it in the car. So I'll keep you updated on that. Subscribe if you'd like to see about more things coming up. You can always go to my website, goodnoise.ca, and sign up for my mailing list, and I will mail you the information if and when that actually happens. Comments, questions, please ask them, please make them. They are much appreciated. All right, thank you. Goodbye.